Tony, we just got done talking to Wayne Gallman, and does it speak to what kind of kid he is and how tough he is that suffered a concussion? He says, yeah, I'm ready to go. I'm playing against Florida State. I want to practice.
Oh, there's no question. He's a tough competitor, and you basically had to take the helmet from him on that game versus NC State, or he wanted to come back in the game. But he knows no fear. That's what makes him a special player. He's not afraid of contact, and he wants to be out there with his guys. He believes in his ability to help his football team win, and he just loves to play.
I know you've been diving into the tapes looking at the Florida State defense. Does this defense look different now than when it did probably a month ago when it gave up 63 to Louisville?
Oh, I think that's a fair assessment right there. You watch them early in the season. There's no question that Florida State's always going to have a ton of athletes on the field. They're going to have some of the best guys at every position, throughout the entire country. I think they were doing a lot of things on defense early in the season, but you notice the last 4 games, it looks like they've kind of simplified and just allowed their athletes to go out and play. So you definitely see a difference in them as opposed to the first couple games of the season.
Where is Wayne at as far as physically, and has he passed the concussion protocol as of yet?
Obviously, I don't know that, what the procedure is, what the protocol is. All I know is he's out at practice. Obviously, he's limited in what he can do. We're hopeful that this week he's going to be able to go full go. But, you ask Wayne, you look at him, he looks fine. But, again, I don't live in that world medically to diagnose him to say if he's cleared it. But I know that they talk, and they got good hopes of him playing this weekend.
Do you have a basic understanding of how the protocol has changed this year or in recent years, just with so much attention on concussions and concussion protocol?
Obviously, I think there's a heightened sense and a heightened alarm about the concussions. Obviously, I think you have more data over the years to see the potential long-term effects of guys that have suffered several concussions. I let Coach, I'm not Coach, but Coach Sweeney and Danny Poole and all those guys determine the actual protocol. If they say a guy's had a concussion, you want to err on the side of being cautious. You don't want to put them in, but they got their computer systems and their analysis that they use to make sure that young man's fit to come back and compete.
Wayne didn't even want to call it a concussion. Have you seen that with players, that they are hesitant to admit that because they know that the protocol ahead of them would then follow?
I would imagine there's some of that, but I think in Wayne's situation it was more, I think he was knocked unconscious immediately when he was hit and came back to and didn't really feel any symptoms of his head or his brain being injured. And so I think it was more of how he was feeling as opposed to not wanting to call it a concussion. But obviously Danny and those guys, they took him in, they x-rayed him, and they eval'd him. They found out that obviously there was something that wasn't right, so they kept him out of the game.
Tony, are you game planning for Wayne on Saturday or just not having him there?
Obviously we got a game plan as if he's playing. But again, I got the question after the NC State game when he went out, did the game plan change? And the game plan didn't change. Our run game is our run game, and those guys got to step up and be prepared. And obviously, so we're excited about the possibility of having him back, but we won't know the determination until those guys give us the full go ahead later in the week.
How much did it help last week that they all got the first team reps instead of Wayne getting them in practice all last week?
I think it helps a ton because if you go back and you analyze CJ in the game, thought he did some good things, but you also saw there were some opportunities, where he could have done a little bit better. But I think it was an experience factor. Wayne's played a lot of football. He's been in those battles. He understands and has a chemistry with his offensive line, whereas some of those guys that are down the line aren't getting quite as many reps. It takes reps and repetition with those guys and getting comfortable to be able to extend those 3-yard plays to 5-yard plays to 7-yard plays. And I think that's what you get in Wayne Gallman. So it was critical for all those guys, and then the other thing too, I think anytime you're a backup, you always tell them to be prepared for your opportunity, prepare as if you're a starter, but it's a little bit different when you got a guy in front of you. You tend to not necessarily prepare as if you're the starter, and so all those guys got put in that position, and they see how hard and how difficult it is, to be the first guy to run out.
When you see a hit like that, does it make it hard? Do you think anybody really understands what's a penalty these days? What is it? What should be called? What should be?
They've done their research. They've come up with rules and ways to analyze it, and you see, different calls that as coaches you might think are targeting throughout the course of the country. When you watch, like if you watch games this past weekend, you saw some hits that you thought might be targeting that weren't called, and you saw some other ones that weren't targeting. So I think it's all interpretation of the rule. I know in Wayne's case it was a tough hit, and obviously when you go back and slow it down, then obviously you see there may be an opportunity for a penalty. But in live speed, everything's happened fast. You see two guys with a tough collision like that. So I understand that there's always going to be question, but it's a judgment call, and I'm glad that they do have the instant replay situations to go back and correct some of the situations.
If Wayne's limited or unavailable, I know how highly you guys hold the practice lead up to a game in that situation, but the way CJ did run against NC State, would he have the upper hand on the other guys to be the starter, get most of the reps, or how would you approach that?
I think coming out of that game, right now, if the situation where Wayne wasn't available, he would be the guy that, and as long as, he goes out and has a great week of practice, and he had a good off week, and you saw a little bit of a different pep in his step, understanding what the responsibility of being that number one guy is, and those other guys are nipping at his heels. But I think right now, if we went into it, CJ would be the guy.
Was he getting first team reps last week when Wayne was out?
Who was that? CJ? Yes.
Tony, Sean was in here earlier and talking about the bye week being a good time for players to sort of like reassess their goals or, kind of look a little deeper into that aspect of it. Is that normal at this point in the season, or is it a function of the fact that maybe you guys haven't played to your full potential yet as a team?
I think it's more every week as coaches we try to evaluate ourselves from the previous week, and we try to compile data, as we go week to week to make sure that we understand what we're doing, where our deficiencies are, where our strengths are. And I think players, it's a little bit more difficult, because they're balancing their social life, their school life, everything that's going on. So I think anytime you have an off week, it gives them an opportunity to kind of step back and do exactly what you said, to reevaluate their goals. For us offensively, we still believe we have our best game ahead of us. We've done some good things. Even in the NC State game, we did some good things offensively. We just had some glaring errors that kind of overshadowed how well we played offensively. So, I think it came at a good time. Allows us to get healthy. Allows the guys to kind of take a breath and see that we're right on track to where we want to be with all the goals we have set before us, but also a way to evaluate themselves and to be honest with themselves to say if we're going to accomplish those goals, it's going to take a little bit more from everybody.
Are you guys playing kind of carefree football, or is there more on them this year just because of just how scrutinized everything is when you're in this position?
I think early in the season, they probably felt the pressure a little bit, but I think, here lately they've been going out having fun. They're back to having fun, playing sometimes too careless, at times. And if you go back and I know the biggest question is going to be the turnovers, but if you go back and look, obviously there's one situation down on the goal line where their guy made a play on one of our guys to strip the ball out, but the other ones were more effort plays. And again, so if the guys are playing hard, they're having fun, we'll always continue to scrutinize every single play, and over time, they'll fix the problems.
After NC State, you pointed out the pressure that they were bringing and how much of a premium it was for the tailbacks and tight ends to be helping to protect Deshaun. Expect Florida State to be more the same or even more pressure?
It's hard to tell because early in the season they were a heavy pressure team. They did some different things and some exotic things on third down, and now you've seen them, kind of playing a lot more base, in different situations. So they got an off week. They got time to prepare. They got an opportunity to get their guys healthy as well and get back some more depth in the secondary. So we're preparing for both aspects. Obviously, we got to be prepared for any pressure situation because again, one of the things we pride ourselves in is not letting the quarterback get hit. So they're going to try and find ways to get to Deshaun. So they got to generate pressure. They can do that. They're good enough up front to be able to get pressure with four where they don't have to blitz and play coverage, but then also they're talented enough that they can bring guys from different spots from the secondary, from the backer level. They can change structure, so they can do a lot of things. So we're preparing for both, to pick up the pressure, but then also to be able to manufacture drives going down the field.
Do you want to see Deshaun more active in the running game?
I think whatever the game calls for. Obviously, if they present opportunities for him to pull a ball down and run, we're going to go into every game plan with a specific plan for him to have quarterback runs. And again, not just because he's a dynamic athlete, but anytime you can run the quarterback, you pick up an extra hat. So that gives you an advantage. That gives you an extra blocker, in the run game. So we'll always have a plan. And then again, each game kind of dictates, how effective he is running football.
With Erman Lane making the switch to safety less than a month ago, how much do you look to exploit that up into Deshaun?
He's a tremendous athlete, and obviously we'll be conscious when number 7 does come into the game, but they do a good job of protecting him in terms of keeping him deep, sometimes bringing him up in blitzing situations. So I don't think they're going to present an opportunity where you can just, create a matchup and pick on him because they put him in a position where they kind of keep him out of it, but then also times they put him in positions where he's rushing the passer. So I haven't seen anybody or noticed anything in particular on film where people have been able to exploit him.
You mentioned how many great athletes Florida State has. Do they stand out in that regard in comparison to other teams you've played this year?
In terms of physically, yes, they do. Obviously, if you look at their linebackers, I don't think we've seen two linebackers with the length and athleticism, that they have at linebacker. And then their defensive ends, obviously are two of the best in the country. Sweat off the edge is very, very quick twitch off the edge. And then number 44, DeMarcus, he can play multiple positions. So, and then those two big guys inside are probably the two best interior D linemen that we've seen to date. And then they got a ton of skill guys. I mean, they just keep rolling them. 37, number 1, 24, 24. I mean, they just got guys on that back end that are all athletic and they all look about the same.
But DeMarcus, do you do any chip or anything to kind of, do you always have an idea of where he is? Or?
I think you got to be conscious of where number 44 is, and in every game plan we go into, you always have to have a disaster plan just in case things aren't going right. So we'll work that regardless of whether it's Florida State or next week when we play Syracuse, or we had it for NC State, we had it for Boston College. We're always going to have a plan to help our guys if for some reason we get into a situation where they do have a matchup advantage.
You're pretty confident in your line though, from what you've seen?
I think there's enough evidence to be confident. Obviously, I know that there was a situation up at Boston College where we didn't play our best, and we got the quarterback hit, and then you come back versus NC State, when some say has one of the best defensive lines in the country, and you hold your own, and then you do the same thing versus Louisville in terms of protecting the quarterback. So very, very confident as long as those guys are prepared and come to play.
Coach, speaking of that, Coach Sweeney told us that Jake Morgan had probably his best game against NC State. How would you assess his development halfway through the season?
I think that you've seen good and bad, more good than you've seen bad. I think the Boston College was a wake-up opportunity for him, that you got to be prepared and you got to perform every time you step out on the field. And he was challenged after that game, and you saw him come back and you saw him work on the things that he needed to work on to be successful. And it was the technical things of staying balanced in his sets, and also punching his hands when he needed to punch his hands. And so as long as he continues to play at that level, then you're going to see great things out of him. But then again, he's a young guy, and any young guy is going to have a bad game here and there. It's just how do you respond, and that was a positive thing that you saw out of Jake, that he responded the right way.
You've seen Tavian do some good things with the ball in his hands. Where is he with the ball out of his hands and his pass protection?
He's actually getting a lot better. One thing that I don't know if a lot of people knew about Tavian is coming out of high school, he was a guy that you either handed the ball to him or you ran a route. He wasn't asked to do a whole lot of pass protection. And so first you got to learn how to identify defense, to know who you're picking up. Then you have to have an understanding of what the offensive line's doing. And then anytime those guys up front shift and move, it changes your targeting and your responsibility. Then you got to add the technique piece of it. So I've been very, very pleased with his progress. He's a very intelligent young man. He takes pride in his work. He's learning how to identify. The technique is coming along. So I'm pleased with where he is at pass protection, and I'm excited that he comes to work every single day.
In your estimation, what are going to be the biggest keys to success this weekend? Tallahassee, another big prep game for you guys.
I think is these guys are going to be fired up to play, but emotion is not going to win the game. It's going to come down to our players, winning the matchup. So I think we got to have great effort. We got to be sound with the football in terms of knowing the details of everything we want to do. We can't turn the ball over, and then at the end of the day, when your number's called, you got to win your one-on-one matchup. So we got to stay, we got to be excited to play, but we got to be under control. We got to make sure we take care of the football, and then we got to go win our one-on-one matchups.
Has there been much more emphasis this week on snaps, getting lined up correctly, all those little things that you struggle with on the road, a lot of them do those kind of environments?
Of course, and then just as a whole with the open week, it's an opportunity for us to go back and self-scout and see the things and the tendencies that we have, and we talk about all the time in our program. It's the little things lead to big things. We can't focus on the big things. We got to focus on the details. And so alignment, assignment, technique, that's what wins football games. So from that all the way back to ball security, just spending some time going back to the basics in ball security and putting all of our skill guys through, just the fundamentals of making sure that we all understand what we're trying to get accomplished with ball security, and that carries over into the fundamentals of the snap, catching the snap. We had 2 snaps that we bobbled in this game, one that went over the head versus NC State, and then one down on the third down. Everybody talks about the 4th down stop, but on that 3rd down play, Deshaun takes his eyes off the ball slightly and he fumbles it, and then he picks it back up and then he tries to dive in there, but if you get that handed off, it's probably going to be a touchdown. So, this is a week for us to go back and really, really evaluate ourselves. And again, we believe as a program, it's all about Clemson, and if we take care of Clemson, we're going to be all right.
From what you've seen on tape, when Florida State's been more basic, you feel like the last couple of weeks that's kind of what's allowed them to play better?
I think so, and I think some injuries probably came into factor there. You lose Derwin James, who's an freshman All-American, an unbelievable player. Then you lose a very veteran guy, and Nate Andrews back on the back end, and so now you're playing some young guys. So you got to simplify things to get those guys lined up, and then you're getting into the meat of your schedule where you're playing teams that have scouted you, and they're in the same situation we are. Everybody circles their game on the schedule, so they're going to get the best. So I think early on in the season, they were doing some things with some veteran guys, and they lost some guys, and then they had to kind of scale it back, and then they're just letting their athletes take over by doing that.
Tony, it seems like week after week you guys are lining up against the top 10 defense or one of the country's best defense. Is that just a fact of life now in the ACC?
I think so. I think that the ACC is making a claim for the quality of football that we have in this conference, and it is. Every week you come in, it's like, okay, it's the number 1 defense, it's the number 8 defense, it's the number 10, but I think our guys wouldn't have it any other way. That's how they created their identity last year, and the only way that we can continue to sustain, the level of performance that we want is we got to be challenged week in and week out. So, obviously as a coach, you're like, man, when are you going to get one that's not ranked in the top 10? But at the same time, that's what really motivates your guys to go out and perform with.
Thanks, Coach.